Shalom. The Samaritan sect of Judaism claims to have the oldest Torah scroll. They say that Mount Gerizim in the West Bank is the holy mountain and not the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. We shall discover why neither Jerusalem nor Gerizim are relevant. We see here Yaakov ben Aaron, Samaritan high priest, 1896 to 1916, and the Abisha scroll in 1905. The Samaritans claim that it is 3,000 years old, but that claim is hard to verify. We are looking into the eyes of the chief representative of a religious sect, one of the oldest and certainly smallest in the world. They claim that they are the lineal descendants of the Israelites of old, from a remnant that was left when the tribes were carried into Syrian captivity. There is no doubt but that they are the representatives of the Samaritans of the time of Christ. Have you ever asked yourself, who are the Samaritans? Both the Samaritans and the Jews are Hebrews and Israelites. 2,000 years ago, the Samaritans numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Today, only 777 Samaritans have survived. Protecting Babylonian exile and pre-captivity traditions is central to their culture. They use a spindly, antique version of the Hebrew script. They sacrifice animals, something Jews gave up centuries ago. And because their holy mountain is Mount Gerizim, near the Palestinian town of Nablus, they don't really care very much for the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This unique religious view has proven useful politically. Samaritans can claim Israeli citizenship. They serve in the Israeli army. But their disinterest in Jerusalem means they shun aspects of Zionism. We want East Jerusalem for Palestine and West Jerusalem for Israel, says Hosni Cohen, a Samaritan priest. Let's go to the beginning of all stories, when the words came into existence that make up our story. We're going to find the origin of words for Hebrews, Israelites, Jews, and Samaritans. Because when a concept is named for the first time, it comes into being. The first Hebrews, 1350 BCE. The Amarna letters first mention the term Habru, also Apiru, meaning outsiders, around the year 1350 BCE, meaning the nomads, rebels, outlaws, raiders, mercenaries, bowmen, servants, slaves, and laborers in the region of Canaan. The word Habru is related to Hebrew. Semitic languages often omit some vowels in their spelling. The Amarna letters are an archive written on clay tablets of diplomatic correspondence between the Egyptian administration of Pharaoh Akhenaten and its representatives in Canaan and Amurru in the middle 14th century BC. They are written in cuneiform and Akkadian, the diplomatic language of the time. If we look at where the Habru were active in 1350 BCE, you'll find that their activity is contained within the borders of the modern Israeli and Palestinian territories, 300 years before the establishment of the Kingdom of Israel. The first Israelites, 1208 BCE. The word Israel first appeared in Egyptian hieroglyphics on the Merneptah stele, dated 1208 BCE. This date is also generally agreed to be the time of the return of the Jews from Egypt. Israel is spelled on the Merneptah stele, which celebrates various victories of Pharaoh Merneptah's army in Canaan. Since the Egyptians had only ever been worried about rebellious cities before, the Israelites must have been a new problem for them. They might have been attacking Egypt's trade routes in Canaan. Some people think that the Israelites did not live in cities at this time, and we do not know anything about the actual social structure of the group of people who are called Israel here. But most experts agree that Merneptah's Israel must have been in the hill country in the middle of Canaan. Plundered is the Canaan with every evil. Israel is laid waste, its seed is no more. All lands together are pacified. Everyone who was restless has been bound. The Old Testament reference to Israel. The authorship of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, is attributed to Moses, who lived around 1391 to 1271 BCE, according to rabbinical sources. Is there any archaeological evidence for the existence of Moses, or Moshe, as he is known in Hebrew? And do we have any idea under what pharaoh the Hebrews slaved in their exile? Well, from the 13th century BCE, there exists the Mose stone relief, on which Pharaoh Ramesses II is seen giving lavish gifts to someone called Mose. In Hebrew, the names Mose and Moshe are spelled the same way. The Egyptian character of his name was recognized as such by ancient Jewish writers like Philo and Josephus. Some believe that the Exodus pharaoh was Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great. This idea is even featured in the 1956 Hollywood movie The Ten Commandments. But how did the screenwriters come up with that idea? There's a cue right in the Exodus tale written by Moses himself. Exodus 1, verse 11, says that the Israelites built the garrison cities of Pithom and Ramses. The Egyptians called them Pi-Ramesses. And there is archaeological proof that Ramesses the Great actually built the cities of Pi-Ramesses. So, when we go back to look at the Mose stele, that many skeptics say has nothing to do with Moses or the Exodus, we find that the Mose stele was actually found just 2 kilometers from the ancient remains of Pi-Ramesses. That is not a coincidence. Jacob wrestles with a man. Moses places the birth of the name Israel 500 years before the Merneptah stele, to 1709 BCE. There is no contradiction here with the Egyptian source. From the establishment of a tribe until the tribe becomes powerful enough to be mentioned in Egyptian war records, that can take a while. In the Pentateuch, Genesis 32, verse 24, Jacob wrestles with an unidentified man all night long before crossing a tributary of the Jordan River. Jacob is 100 years old at that point. In the 1200s, Rabbi Rashi said that the Hebrew name Jacob means a lurker and a trickster. That meant it was not a name to be very proud of. After the struggle, the other man tells Jacob, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." And the name Israel in Hebrew means, God perseveres, or a man who wrestles with God. In modern times, Israel is understood to mean man seeing God. Some commentators say it was God himself that Jacob wrestled with, or an angel, or even Jesus himself. But, truth be told, we don't know who it was. The newly named Israel, aka Jacob, then went on to purchase a plot of land at Shechem, Nablus, near Gerizim in Samaria. This is the location of Jacob's well. The prince of Shechem took Dinah's virginity while she was a resident there. Dinah's brothers were furious, and they suggested a bargain with the prince. In exchange for the honorable marriage of his daughter, the prince should circumcise every man in his tribe. In essence, Simeon and Levi invited the non-believers to join the faith of Israel. Thus, the prince of Shechem and the whole city were circumcised. But Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, had not been truthful. They could not stand the idea of Gentiles marrying Israeli girls. So after 3 days, they went and killed all the men of the tribe and plundered the city of Shechem, taking all their women, children, valuables, and livestock from the fields as their own. Jacob was upset. On his deathbed, he spoke of their cruelty and prophesied that the families of Simeon and Levi would be broken up, which happened. Nowadays, some scholars argue that the people of Shechem were prototypes for the Samaritans, a people nominally identified with Israel before the Babylonian exile but excluded from allying with the Jews upon their return to Zion. Egyptian reference. In the Egyptian language of the time, the word Israel, in hieroglyphics symbolized a foreign people, typically nomadic groups or peoples, without a fixed city-state home. That description is, of course, right on target for the year 1208 BCE. King Solomon would not start the kingdom of Israel for another 150 years. The kingdom of Israel, approximate 1047 to 922 BCE. When King Solomon, the founder of the kingdom, died between 926 and 922 BCE, 10 rebellious northern tribes refused to follow his son and heir, Rehoboam, because he made them work too hard. All of the tribes, except Judah and Benjamin, rejected him as king. From this point on, there would be two kingdoms of Hebrews, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. The Israelites formed their capital in the city of Samaria, and the Judeans kept their capital in Jerusalem. These kingdoms remained separate states for over 200 years, until they were both conquered, one after the other. The word Jew first appears after the conquest of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah by the Assyrians in 722 BCE. Since only the kingdom of Judah survived, Yehudi came to denote Jewish, a follower of Yahweh. The Assyrians scattered the leaders of the tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel in small groups throughout the Middle East. They became what is known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. But it was not long before the kingdom of Judah suffered a similar fate. In 597 BCE, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon laid siege to and conquered Jerusalem, destroying Solomon's temple and exiling the Jews to Babylon for 70 years. In 539 BCE, the founder of the Persian Empire, Cyrus the Great, gave the Judeans permission to return to their homeland. The Jews returned home to Israel with a vastly different Torah than the one they had left with. The Israelite Samaritans were surprised. They still only knew the first 5 books of the Torah, namely the Pentateuch of Moses. But the new Judean Masoretic Torah written in the Babylonian exile now consisted of an additional 34 books, none of which are known to the Samaritan liturgy to this day. The Jews of the southern kingdom believed that the Samaritan Israelites, who had remained in the north, were a small group of unfaithfuls, intermarrying with the non-Jewish invaders. They frowned on the Samaritans, denying that any non-Hebrew had any right to be included among the chosen people. This echoes the sentiment of the story of Jacob, where Simeon and Levi could not accept the born Gentiles, even after their circumcision. The newly settled Assyrians that came to Samaria, the Samaritan territory, initially brought with them their own gods, but within a short time they worshipped Yahweh as well as their own gods, and then within a couple of centuries, they worshipped Yahweh exclusively. The dispute over the Holy Mountain. A central part of the disagreement between Israelites, as the Samaritans call themselves, and the Judeans, who call themselves Jews, is the location of their holy mountain. The Holy Mountain is where Abraham was told to sacrifice his only son, Isaac, by God, only to be told at the last minute that it was just a test. The Jews believe that the mountain is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, where both Solomon's and the Second Temple were built. The name of the Holy Mountain is Moriah or Maria in Hebrew. Marwa in Arabic, Amoria in Greek, and last but not least, Mor, according to the Samaritans. As mentioned before, Semitic languages often don't include all the vowels, which doesn't really help in identifying places accurately. The Samaritan Bible calls the place of Abraham's sacrifice Mor. This is the geographic region around Shechem, on Mount Gerizim. The Old Testament Bible that Jews, Christians, and Muslims are using calls the place Moriah, which is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. In essence, the conflict between Jews and Samaritans, or between Judeans and Israelites, is that they disagree on the location where God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son and, later, where to build a temple and exclusively worship Yahweh. Thus was formed the only major schism in the Yahweh religion, the schism between the Jews and the Samaritans. Between the 7th and 10th centuries AD, a group of scribes known as the Masters of Tradition, the Masoretes, in the Middle East compiled the Masoretic Torah. According to the Masoretic version, it says in Deuteronomy 27 to build an altar on Mount Ebal, the mount of offense, or cursing. So when you have crossed over the Jordan, you shall set up these stones, about which I am commanding you today, on Mount Ebal, and you shall cover them with plaster. This text and translation are inherited by nearly all Abrahamic religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, in the world. The lone exception are the Samaritans. Their text reads, Mount Gerizim. This passage is problematic. Why? The Mount of Blessing is Mount Gerizim, there Israel gathers to bless. But the Masoretic text of Deuteronomy 27 verse 4 records a very perplexing commandment, to build the altar on Mount Ebal, the mountain of cursing. What do the Dead Sea Scrolls say about the altar? The scrolls that were found in Qumran are over 2,000 years old, 1,000 years older than the oldest surviving Masoretic Torah scroll. Now, you would expect that the Masoretic Torah would be a good match with the texts of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? But this is not so. The Dead Sea Scrolls match the Samaritan texts more closely than the Masoretic text, leading some researchers to believe the Samaritan text held validity in the minds of Jews during the Second Temple period and that both texts were once studied together. The scroll is written in black ink on brown leather, measuring about 40 mm wide and containing 4 lines of text. Only this fragment remains from a complete leather-bound copy of Deuteronomy. This copy of Deuteronomy was most likely inscribed around 50 to 20 BCE. In the second line of this fragment, the scribe wrote Bergerzim, which means, on Mount Gerizim. Except for Samaritan manuscripts, all Hebrew manuscripts of Deuteronomy contain, on Mount Ebal, in that verse. The translation of this scroll reads, When you have crossed the Jordan, you shall set up these stones, about which I charge you today, on Mount Gerizim, and coat them with plaster.